First piece of Gemarah began by explaining to us what is the source that we watch in Good Morning Shimmy. What is the source that we watch in these three places? The Gemarah gave two different sources. It was one pasuk, but the pasuk used the words Moshe, Aaron, Ubanav, that they were the ones that watched Mishmeres HaKodesh. And the Gemarah's first answer is that Moshe, Aaron, Ubanav is three different places. How is that three places that they watched in the Bais HaMikdash? Moshe is place one. The Gemarah said you have to put a comma after that part of the pasuk. And place two is Aaron Ubanav. Banav of Aaron is two. Aaron had two children. And Aaron is three. That gives us the three places that they watched the Bais HaMikdash, source number one. Source number two said Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi taught us that the end of the pasuk used the words Shoimrim Mishmeres Le Mishmeres. 3 words of Shmirah, 3 words of guarding. That's the very bottom of Chavav and Aleph. And that's how we learned that there are 3 places that we watch the Bais HaMikdash. We turned over to Chavav and Beis, and the Gemarah began by quoting the Mishnah. The Mishnah said Beis Havtinas and Beis HaNitzoitz were second floors. And there's 2 ways that you could have a second floor. Either you could have a second floor like you have in a house, in which you have a top floor and you have a bottom floor. Someone lives on floor 2, someone lives on floor 1. Or you could have a second floor like a elevated porch that some people have, which means what? That you could live, you could dwell, you could be on floor 2, but what's underneath it? Nothing. So ask the Gemarah, Beis Havtinos and Beis HaNitzoitz, these 2 areas in which they guarded the Bais HaMikdash, were they a real 2 floors, meaning that they had a floor underneath it? Or was it just an elevated area? The Gemarah brought a raya from a Mishnah in Midos, that the Mishnah there taught us that on the top were the kohanim, and the bottom underneath, the Leviim watched. What does that show us? That shows us very clearly that what type of 2-floored structure was it? A real 2-floored structure. Meaning that the top floor was the kohanim, bottom floor was the Leviim. Now we continue. We are on Chavav and Beis. Says the Gemarah, Minna Hani Mili. Approximately 6 lines down. Says the Gemarah, now we would like to try to figure out how do we know what is the source for the kohanim and the Leviim watching. Ditanu Rabbanon. Again, we're about 6 lines down. Minahani Mili, Ditanu Rabbanon. Says the Gemarah, we learned in a Braisa that we have a pasuk. What does the pasuk teach us? V'yilavu alecha v'shar sucha. From here, we learn now from this pasuk. Ba'avoidascha hakasa medaber. It's talking about avoidascha, your avoida. Here we have a pasuk that the Leviim and the kohanim are doing something together in tandem. So says the Gemarah, ba'avoidascha, and your avoida, and your work, that's what the pasuk is referring to. But now we have to figure out what precisely does this mean in your avoida. You'll see in a moment what's going on. Ata Imer, says the Gemarah, you say, ba'avoidascha hakasa medaber, oy einoi. Again, let's see the contrast. From the contrast, we'll see what's going on. Oy eino ela ba'avoidasam. Or it means in the avoida of the Leviim. Meaning that the Leviim are going to watch, not in the same place of the kohanim. So now we understand what's going on. The question is, did the Leviim and the kohanim guard together, or are the Leviim in one place and the kohanim in another place? Says the Gemarah, Kishau Omer, when the pasuk says, V'nilvu alecha v'shamru, when the pasuk says, and they will accompany you and they will watch, l'chol kelav u'l'chol avoda asai, all the kelim in the Bais HaMikdash and all the work in the Bais HaMikdash, harei, that pasuk, ba'avoidasam amur. That pasuk is referring to the avodah of the Leviim. Hamani mekayim v'yilavu alecha v'shar sucha. So what do I do with this other pasuk? Ba'avoidascha kasamidaber. The pasuk is referring to in your avoida haketzad. Once we see this line, we'll go back and we'll see exactly what the Gemarah just said. Ha-kohanim shaymrim milmala uleviim milmata. So what source did we just bring? What's the makar? We just said a moment ago that the Bais HaMikdash and Bais HaNitzites were what? 2-floored structures. Top floor kohanim, bottom floor levim. Says Gemarah, how do you know that? How do you know precisely that the kohanim were on top and the levim were on the bottom? So we prove it from a pasuk. What's the pasuk? The pasuk says, "V'yilavu alecha v'yishar sucha." It's a pasuk in Bamidbar that the pasuk says that they're going to accompany you and serve with you. So now we see that the levim and the kohanim are getting together in doing this avodah and doing this shmirah, doing this guarding of the Bais HaMikdash. But now we want to know, does this mean that they serve and they guard together? Or does it mean they serve and they guard separately? Says the Gemarah, since we have 2 different psukim, one pasuk says, "V'nilvu alecha v'shamru." Another pasuk says, "V'yilavu alecha v'yishar sucha." Because we have 2 different psukim, what does that clearly indicate? That one pasuk is the Leviim, one pasuk is the kohanim, and therefore we see what? That the kohanim are up top and the Leviim are on bottom. So this first piece of Gemarah that we're learning today, we'll say is a little bit of a sidebar, because really our Mishnah didn't even discuss the Leviim guarding the Bais HaMikdash, right? All we're talking about is the kohanim. Why do we get involved in this? Because we needed a makar, that it's 3 places for the kohanim. Those makar, then we went into the fact that the Bais HaMikdash and the Bais HaNitzites were 2-floored structures. Once we got involved in 2-floored structures, we brought the Mishnah in, midais, that the kohanim are top, Leviim are the bottom. We bring a source for that as well. Now we continue. We're at the 2 dots, smack in the middle of Chavav and Beis, and now we go back into our Mishnah. We just discussed the first 2 places where the kohanim watch, the Bais HaMikdash and the Bais HaNitzites. Now we discuss the Bais HaMokad. What did the Mishnah say was unique, was different about the Bais HaMokad? Number 1, it was big. Number 2, it had a kippah, it had a domed roof. And number 3, it was only 1 floor. Says the Gemarah, V'chad Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam She'akol Nihiyeh B'dvarei. Says the Gemarah, V'chad Shomer Hu Dehava B'Beis HaMokad. Was there only 1 Shomer in the Bais HaMokad? Because what did the Mishnah say? There were 3 places they watched the Bais HaMikdash: Bais HaMikdash, Bais HaNitzites, and Bais HaMokad. So what does that clearly indicate? How many Shomerim in each? 1. Asks the Gemarah, is that true? That there was only 1 Shomer in the Bais HaMokad? V'reminhi, I'll ask you a contradiction. Says the Mishnah in Midais, Shnei Sha'arim Hayu beBeis HaMokad. There were 2 Sha'arim. There were 2 gates in the Bais HaMokad. Echad, one of those gates was Psuach Lechel. One was open into the Chel, which is the empty 10 Amos area between the Harabayis by the Azara, one side of it, and Echad Patuach LaZara. So we have 2 gates. One open one way and one open the other way. Like we're in a room right here, right? We have 1 door on that side, and we have 1 door on that side. So this Bais HaMokad, which was a large structure, had 2 gates. One open on one side and one open on the other side. And Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Bizeh, from this gate, Nechnasim LaAzara, they went into the Azara. What do they have in that gate? Pishpeish Katan Hayuloi. Pishpeish is an interesting word. It's a Bais HaMikdash type word. Pishpeish is very good. A small door, a small opening. Within the large, if you have these massive, large, opulent doors, inside of them there was a smaller door. Pishpeish Katan Hayuloi. And from that door, Shabai Nechnasim, that door they would enter, Liv Loish. What does Liv Loish mean? To search, to check, Ha'azara, to check the Hazara when they went to go around, which we'll see in a little bit, that the kohanim, the levied, they would make rounds every day, walking around the Bais HaMikdash, making sure all the kelim where they needed to be, nothing was tamei, etc., etc. So we see that there's a Mishnah that's teaching us that how many doors had the Bais HaMokad? 2 doors. So why is there only 1 shomer? If I have 2 doors to a room, how many shomerim should I have? 2. So I asked the Gemarah, why in the Mishnah did it say that the Bais HaMokad only had 1 shomer? Amar Abaye, says Abaye, Kivan dikabi hadadi avekaimei, says Abaye. You know why? Since the 2 doors were opposite each other, sagiluhu bechad shomer. 1 shomer suffices. Why? Davi lahacha v'davi lehacha, because he's able to see both areas. Since the 2 doors are one opposite the other, you're able to see out of both doors. If I have a door right here and a door directly opposite me, I don't need to have 2 different watchmen, because one guy could see outside of both places. So how many watchmen were in the Bais HaMokad? 1. What's the reason? The reason is even though there were 2 doors, we were able to see outside of both of them from one location. Continues the Gemarah, what else was inside the Bais HaMokad? Inside the Bais HaMokad was rows of stones around the perimeter. That did what? The elderly kohanim slept on the rows of stone. So it continues the Gemarah, we're about 13 lines to the bottom of Chavav and Beis by the 2 dots. Mukaf roivadim shel even. The Bais HaMokad was mukaf, was surrounded. Hakafa was surrounded with roivadim shel even, with rows of stones. Says the Gemarah, my roivadim, these stones, my nihu. What were these stones? Explains the Gemarah. Gizrisa ditztavsa. You know what they were? These stones were chiseled, hewn, H-E-W-N, hewn stones in which tisalki behu li'itztavsa. These were chiseled stones. These are chiseled stones on top of chiseled stones. Basically, if you were to make a bed out of a stone, what would you do? You take 1 large stone and you take another large stone on top of it. So you have 1 large stone. How do you get a large stone? You cut it. So you cut 1 large stone and you put on top of it another large stone. What's the problem with having a large chiseled, cut out stone? Asks the Gemarah, 1 second. It's a big problem. What's the problem? Oh, very good. But would they cut stones in the Bais HaMikdash? V'aksiv. But the pasuk in Malachim teaches us V'abayis and the Bais HaMikdash bihi banoisai even shleima. That when they built the Bais HaMikdash, they had to use even shleima. They had to use whole stones. So why are you telling me that the way that they built these rows of stones inside the Bais HaMokad was how? Was by putting chiseled stones on top of chiseled stones. You can't do that. It has to be whole stones. Answers the Gemarah. Amar Abaye, says Abaye. Which I think if we all would think about this for a moment, you got to somehow get the stone inside, right? You don't transport a whole mountain. So what does it mean? It has to be a whole stone. So explains Abaye. You know what it means? Dimitakni meikara avnei zutrasa. They would prepare smaller stones and va'avnei ravrivasa and larger stones. Kidirsev avnei eser amois avnei shmoina amois. Meaning, where were you not allowed to cut the stones? Only within the process, within the Bais HaMikdash. But when they took it off the mountain, right? How do you get a stone? You cut it off the mountain. When you prepared it off the mountain, then they would cut off larger ones and they would cut off smaller ones. So That's how you would get a larger stone and a smaller stone. Now, by the way, 10 amos, just could we just understand how large that is? 10 amos is approximately 15 feet. That's how big these stones were. If you go to the chisel, the very bottom, if you ever notice, they start off very big and they get smaller as you go up. It's the only way to build. The very bottom are massive stones. If you go into the tunnel stores and you go even deeper underneath ground, you get even larger underneath. These stones that they use in the Bais HaMikdash, says the Pasuk in Malachim, were 10 amos large and 8 amos large. And that's how they would use them to put inside the Bais HaMokad for the elderly kohanim to sleep on. Continues the Gemarah. We have one more minute. Let's go. Ziknei Bais Av. We are 5 lines from the bottom of Chafam Bais. Ziknei Bais Av Yeshenim Sham. The elderly kohanim would sleep on these stones. Asks the Gemarah, V'amai. What's the reason that the elderly kohanim slept on the stones? Laili mitois. I don't get it. Why are we making them sleep on a stone? Just bring a bed into the Bais HaMikdash. What's going on over here? Says Abaye, what are you talking about? Amar Abaye, la voyrech aro lauye mitos the Bais HaMikdash. It's not proper. It's a Bais HaMikdash. What are you doing? So I understand you have to sleep, but it's not proper to bring a bed into the Bais HaMikdash. Let's just do a chazara outside of what we just did today. We started off learning today about the Bais Haftinos and the Bais HaNitzites, these elevated structures, in which yesterday we proved are real 2-floor structures. The kohanim are on top and the leviim are on the bottom. Today we began with the source that the kohanim and leviim did not guard in tandem together, but rather was at 2 different areas. V'yilavu alecha v'yisharsucha and v'nilvu alecha v'shamaru. And that's how we learned that the kohanim are on top and the leviim are on the bottom. We continued learning that the Bais HaMokad was a large area, and that was the 3rd place that there was a shomer in the Bais HaMikdash. The Gemarah said, why is only 1 shomer? There are 2 doors to the Bais HaMokad. Answer the Gemarah, correct, there are 2 doors. But of course, 1 door is opposite the next door. 1 shomer is able to see both areas. And finally, we learned that where did the elderly kohanim sleep inside the Bais HaMokad? They slept on top of rows of stones. The question is, what were the rows of stones? They were hewn stones, one on top of another. How do you get hewn stones? You're not allowed to chisel stones for the Bais HaMikdash. Says the Gemarah, correct. The stones were indeed Evin Shlema. They were complete stones, but when they initially cut them out of the mountain, they would create some larger and some smaller. And how large? 10 and 8 amos large. And finally, why do they sleep on stones? Why do they not sleep on a bed? Abaye explains, because it's not proper to bring a bed into the Bais HaMikdash.